All right. This is an overview of the agenda today. We're going to do an icebreaker. Then I'm going to introduce Bank Street and our model. Then we are going to do case study discussions in small groups. Then we're going to have a reading discussion in a whole group. We're going to do reflection, and then we're going to close out. So we're very, very packed. So what I would like you all to do, answer this question in the chat, but do not press enter. We're going to have you waterfall it. So I would like everyone to reflect on their professional journey and think about a positive mentor or mentors that you had. And in the chat, share what made that experience so powerful. So give everyone about a minute or so to answer this question. All right. And I would like to see all your answers and send them now. Here we go. Attentive to my learning style, caring person, always an open door for questions and suggestions, real interest in my goals, focusing on grace, not perfection, education along the way. The owner of a company, nothing was too small to do, supportive and knowledgeable, patient, generally cared, believing in me. The person I was working for believed in me and took the time to help me grow. Interest in personal life as well as professional life. Mentor who really understood where I was in my learning journey. Direct feedback, kept it real, cared about my growth, my life personality, guided me towards my goals and ambitions, and believed in me. So our guiding question for today really focuses on how you all as intermediaries can support building those kinds of relationships. And it's like, a little tricky, right? So I'm going to tell you who we are as Bank Street and kind of posit ourselves in a way that we can support you all. So we are a graduate school. Our focus is on teacher preparation and especially infant, toddler care and development. It's a little bit unique in the field to have an institution that really focuses on infants and toddlers. We are very, very, very relationship focused. We're going to get a bit into our philosophy and how it translates into mentoring and coaching in our next session. But for your relevance, it's like we are a relationship focused institution, and we really see that translating to public impact partnerships. Learning Starts at Birth is a program within Bank Street that seeks to create a more equitable childcare system. And we work with states, districts, and educators across the country to support local leaders in strengthening systems in ways that work for their communities. So our approach to partnership is that we know change happens by engaging all levels of the systems, educators, leaders, systems, community. Everyone has to be engaged in order for us to see effective change. We attend to the intersections of race, culture, and equity. So we see systems as steeped in history and also intersectional, and looking at how each of these affects every level of a system. We ensure that we understand the needs of the partner and adapt our model and approach to their strengths and areas of interest or need. And like I said, we are strength-based and relationship-focused. So I know that we have a lot of workforce people on this call. So I just wanted to give kind of a little bit of an overview of early childhood teacher preparation. And if you already know this, then just tune out for a minute or so. So depending on the state, educators can become lead teachers with a wide range of credentials, from a CDA, which requires 3 ECE credits, classroom experience and the creation of a portfolio, to a bachelor's or a master's degree in early childhood. So you have this really wide range of what formal education is needed to become a lead teacher. And in Michigan, you need a CDA. So that's kind of the educator preparation that is required to be in a preschool setting. Teachers are at the highest risk of attrition during the first 3 years of their career. And developing strong support systems within programs has been shown to decrease attrition rates. So if we, as workforce supports, can help programs develop these systems of onboarding, of mentoring, of induction, then we know that we can keep teachers engaged in the field and better supporting our families. And regardless of the amount of higher education, all teachers benefit from mentoring and coaching. So, like you all showed us with your responses, mentoring is about relationships, and it's really focused on this dynamic between you and another person. And in the classroom, that's especially potent because the work of teachers is so interpersonal and it's so intimate. So that's a little background on early teacher preparation. So the guiding question for our sessions today and over the next few months is going to be, as an intermediary, how can we support the design and implementation of a quality mentor-teacher program? And we will get into both the relationship aspect of those as well as the more technical and structural aspects of those. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tara.
Thank you. Liz, can you go back? There should be one more slide with a quote before we switch to this.
Nope.
Oh, all right. Okay. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all again. Thanks for giving me a second round with you all. I'm grateful for that. So I do want to share, like Liz was saying, the idea of a mentorship program. It's almost like a mini package or a mini project within your overarching registered apprenticeship program. So I'm going to say that because there's going to be a lot of content to cover and a lot of details to iron out as we progress today. But the important thing to remember is that when we're thinking about a high quality mentorship, we're not just increasing the capacity of that mentor, but what we're actually doing is we're giving them opportunities to grow in their leadership, to gain new skills, to earn extra income. And overall, that means that we're helping them to stay engaged and challenged, and we're growing our leadership pipeline, but that also helps with the retention of them as well. So when we're thinking about an ECU apprenticeship, if we're also factoring in the idea of a high quality process for the mentors in this process, in the apprenticeship, we're not just bringing in new folks, we're also cultivating the folks that we have. So this is really increasing the stock of our early educators. And so I think that this is a really critical point to raise up and just to kind of point out, especially as we're struggling with employers who are really spread thin and challenged by the idea of like, why should I do an apprenticeship if there's extra paperwork, extra burden for me? So just keep that in the back of your mind. It's often a highlight for employers to be thinking about their leadership pipeline as well as bringing in new educators. One of the things we wanted to really point out, and we did this through homework or pre-work, if you will, and actually, before I talk about that, I want to acknowledge the fact that the pre-work went out way last minute, and just know that's not our intention to do that moving forward. It is definitely our intention to make sure if there's anything we think is relevant before our session, that you have that far in advance. Our goal in sharing that with you was that it would give you an opportunity to get a broader lens on how some ECU apprenticeships are looking, but specifically their mentor projects. And we really wanted to be engaging and make sure you had plenty of time with your peers to problem solve, to share information, to think about the mechanics of your mentorship. So that's why we assigned it beforehand, so that you would be able to go into a small group and talk things through without needing us to kind of talk at you the whole time. So just keep that in your mind and accept our apologies, please. It is not our intention to give you the homework at the last minute, and we apologize that this happened. But if you haven't had a chance to look at the document, if you have, thank you. We appreciate it, and I bet your groups will too. But in a minute or in a couple of minutes, we're going to break out into small group sessions. The small group session is really going to focus in on those two case studies that were in that document. So the Vermont and the Rhode Island case study. I suggest that when you get into your small group, to make that time as valuable as possible, check in with each other. If most of you haven't had the chance to look at it, take a look at it. Spend 2 minutes skimming it and reading it before you dive into your conversation. There's a lot of details in there, and it really helps to paint a picture on how different mentorships have been established and the components that went into it. So I think it will have a lot of value. The other thing I want to point out about the ECE snapshots, and thanks Liz for putting the link to the document into the chat box. So if any of you need that, it's easy access in our chat box, is that towards the end of the document, there's some cheat sheets, if you will. It breaks down the conversation on mentor. I think it's table 3 and 4, starting at page 22. And it kind of gives you a grid. So at a glance, you can kind of see how the folks that were part of the Bank Street community of practice for this document established their mentor project and what that looked like. But then you can also see the kind of professional development that the mentors underwent through the process, which I have a feeling is going to be a big part of this process and our design moving forward. So with that being said, I'm going to start to put us into, actually, we have a couple of minutes. Can I see it by it, like, if you had a chance to read it, read the document beforehand, can you like raise your hand, or if you're not on camera, can you somehow like use an emoji to let me know? And nobody's judging anybody, so if you didn't, just hang out. I see a couple of people, some people a little bit, not so much. Great. Okay, this is great. Thank you. I appreciate the honesty. There's a couple of things I just want to highlight, right? That you'll still have the chance when we go into our small groups, you'll have plenty of time to take a look at the case studies, but just a couple of things I think are worth lifting up. So basically this document outlines what a community of practice that Bank Street ran on ECE apprenticeships, what the partners who were part of that practice used in their design for not just their ECE apprenticeship, but also their mentorship. So it's kind of helpful because when we're thinking about our early childhood apprenticeships, it's really challenging, right? Because the most important part of an ECE apprenticeship is that it's responsive to the needs in the community. And so there's not one way to do it, right? It's not like this is a best practice model, let's all do it this way. It needs to be reflective of the people who it's serving. And so in this document, you can kind of get a feel for all of the ways that people are implementing. But when it comes to the mentoring, there's a couple of things I think worth lifting up. So first of all, out of those who were surveyed through the community of practice, 50% of the mentors were actually lead teachers in the classroom. That means less than 50% were mentors were directors or administrators in the building. So just keep that in your mind when you're thinking about working with your employers on, establishing who might be a good mentor. At least half of the models, or actually more than half of the models, required very specific professional development for the mentors. So there's definitely a lean into the idea that our mentors have specific competencies, knowledge that needs to be developed over time. And so there has been a professional development pathway built for them. And that professional development looks different according to the model, the funding, what's available. It could be once and done training. It could be training at the beginning of the kickoff. It could be professional development throughout their mentorship. It could be a community of practice. And in your case studies, you'll get a couple of examples. The other thing is 40% of the apprenticeships did not have a specific qualification that was required, right? Mind-boggling, especially when we're thinking about apprenticeships and journey workers, right? So just keep in mind that early childhood often follows a career pathway, which means that staff might meet the same CDA level in various ways. So when we're thinking about establishing a baseline requirement for our journey workers or our mentors, we want to be thinking broadly about what that can look like and not just, kind of pin it in one way. I think sometimes doing that can exclude some of our programs without us really knowing it. Most of the programs offered stipends, which is great. And many of the challenges that were reported were really about recruiting the mentors. And folks found that the incentives that were helpful in order to get more mentors was really thinking about the professional development as something that was credit bearing and would carry value in a higher level credential. They also found that having like the option to do virtual coaching potentially, like when your mentor isn't just on site, but there's another support person, that would be helpful. Also thinking about group sessions. So that ratio is sometimes tricky for small programs to meet. And so what would it look like in order to have multiple mentors come together and work with apprentices as a small group? So that's just a quick overview. I think sometimes when I look at that document, I like to just look at the pop-outs. There's like some stats that are in there. I think it says in the very beginning, like 60% of ECE apprenticeships have 4 or more partners. So just keep those things in mind. And if you have a chance to look at the document, I do recommend you take a look at those pop-outs. Okay, so anyway, back to the small groups. Thank you for humoring me and hearing a little bit about the way that mentorships have been established. So we are going to break out into small groups and we should have plenty of time. I'm just zeroing back up. Yep, we'll have plenty of time. So take some time to read those case studies. They're later in the book. I think page 15 is where Rhode Island starts. I can look that up. But yeah, so we're going to Thank you, Bonnie. Page 10 is where Rhode Island is. And then Vermont is another color too. It's a couple pages after. Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate that. So in our small groups, we're going to have some questions to talk through. And we're going to ask that when you come together, to identify both a reporter and a recorder. Okay, you've done this before, so it sounds familiar. But what we're trying to do is get some information that will help us to design future sessions as well. So by having somebody who will record your responses into our Menti, that will give us some written documentation in case we miss things through your report out. But we also want to make sure that you all get to, as I like to call it, cross-pollinate your ideas. And feel like, even though we're in smaller groups, you have that same fellowship going across the whole group. So we are going to focus on a reporter. You'll see on this slide, we have the questions that we're going to have you work through. The ones that are bolded are the ones that we would like you to report out on the Menti. And that's set up for you. So you don't have to remember that, but just keep that in the back of your head. What has challenged you? Obviously, that's helpful to us in designing future sessions. What will influence your work? And then also, what are you still wondering about? All right. So with that being said, I just want to make sure. Oh, do we know how many small groups there will be?
Yes, there will be 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, 4. So this is the other thing I want to say. When we come back, we're going to report out. Make sure your report out is like 2 to 3 minutes at the most. I think that works for time. And essentially, think about your most important thing to share out that you want to focus on. But then if somebody else shares it, you can just be like, yes, that, and here's another thing that we discovered. All right, so with that being said, I think you have all of the directions you need. Are there any questions?
How much time in the breakout rooms, Tara?
Yep, so we are actually ahead of schedule. We allotted 20 minutes for this activity. So it looks like we're going to get the full time. You'll have plenty of time, and like I suggested, 20 minutes is a long time to chit chat. So hopefully these questions help to guide you in what you're thinking through, the components to consider. And please take a couple of minutes to read the case studies and become familiar with what a couple of other states have already done. Thanks, Misty. Great question.
Okay, any other questions before I move you all into your breakout rooms?
I'm not able to access the case studies. I know that they were put in the chat, but I got disconnected in the beginning. That actually might be the problem right there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Awesome. Okay, with that, I will be sending you all to your breakout rooms now.
Actually, I just want to say one more thing. Sorry.
Okay. No problem.
Liz and I are going to hang back here. We don't want to be voyeurs, but if there's something that is coming up in your group, feel free to pop back over and ask one of us to join you. But we didn't want to kind of pop in and out. We find that sometimes that stalls conversation. But feel free to reach out if you need anything from us.
All right, great. Here we go. Got just about 10 more seconds before everyone will be back. Good to go.
Welcome back. All right. So one of the things that might not have been very clear when you went out into your groups was when will the Menti be posted for you to put your responses in? So now you have it. Here it is. We invited each group to report out as a whole, but given the fact that it's there now, feel free to add a post it as an individual or as a whole group, depending upon what you see or don't see. And then while we're working on that, we'll give you a couple of minutes to work through the different questions. If you were part of the reporting out team, so each group identified a reporter, can you put an emoji or highlight yourself somehow just so I know who we should be surfacing through? Great. So we have Bonnie and Chad, brave souls. I love it. And Carla. I think there should be one more person. Karen, great. Thank you. All right, so it looks like we have one response so far to the Menti. So feel free, if you were the recorder, to make sure you're plopping in your responses in there. And as an individual, if there was something else you wanted to share, please do so. And again, this is really just to kind of help us in designing what we're doing in the future. So anything that challenged you most with the reading, time, finding it, accessing it, it could be like visualizing what they were talking about, understanding the funding, whatever, just let us know. Okay, so I'm going to go in the order you are on my screen, and Bonnie, you are first. If you want to kind of go through and just summarize the conversation and tell us what came up for you all, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about the fact that there are, and it's what I was just typing now, there are no requirements for mentor qualifications because things are different in every childcare setting in terms of teacher experience and education and things like that. And so how do you guarantee like a good mentoring experience for the apprentice? And so we were all sort of excited by the idea of creating that baseline qualification by providing training for the mentors that like turns them into high quality mentors through the course of the training. And the fact that Vermont's training is, I think it was Vermont, has college credit attached to it. So that's a great incentive for the mentors, even beyond the stipend that some of us provide and some of us don't. So not only do they end up taking on a leadership role in their center, but they also extend their own qualifications for future roles. And we ended up talking about like what we do right now with mentor orientations and things like that, and the idea about creating a curriculum for mentors going forward. We also ended up sort of having a sidebar conversation about mentor apprentice ratios and the fact that those don't seem to be standardized across our programs. That I just learned in our conversation that at least one program, it has been approved to do a 3-to-1 mentor ratio, whereas we were told that we had to do a 1-to-1. And so it's just really interesting to see where the logistics have changed, and the lack of like awareness that we all have of what each of us was required to do. Not by the grantors, but by like whatever.
It's an interpretation of policy usually. I hear this problem everywhere, like across multiple states. I think it's less about you all not being clear and more about the people who are sharing the information and the interpretation of policy and how it's getting communicated. So,
right. And clearly, like some of us had information given by like one person versus a different person, and they all had different interpretations. And because none of us were talking to each other about it, none of us like asked questions about why things could have been different.
well, this is beautiful then, because now that connection has been made and now you all get to kind of say, hey, let's examine this and like, let's think about this. And then how can we, you know, politely push back and, you know, make sure that this is making sense. That's great. I love that. Thank you, Bonnie. So I heard a lot about the ratio that comes up common, and then thinking about the training intentionally, I think is really critical, and we'll dive a little bit more into that next week. So I'm glad, or next month, I should say. So thank you for that share out. Okay, so we have what challenged you most is posted, and we're gonna move into the next topic. So hopefully the person who's reporting out is different than the person who was recording responses, so that they're not multitasking. But Chad, is that true for you? Would you be ready to share out now?
Sure thing.
Great, thanks, Chad.
So you want me to talk about the challenges or the influence now?
Just whatever you're like, the overarching conversation.
Yeah.
And
So I'll rattle through real quick. We had quite a few challenges. We mentioned, or we noted, starting with for my region, we have a lot of refugees. We're a welcome city. So ESL, they mentioned in the one account how getting interpreters and supports mentor time is always extremely limited. Vermont had specific courses, so we're looking at upward mobility opportunities and courses for mentors, even though they're already stretched thin. What else we can do? Of course, the staffing. We always talk about the staffing. So many programs are understaffed, which hurts the mentors even more. And then we talked about how recruiting, even though we try to tell the young students or people in childcare centers how great it is, guidance counselors or their parents are sometimes not encouraging that. So we have pushback from those in the community. Sebastian had a great one. I wanted to know more about stipends. He mentioned a big challenge he's overcoming is when the funds end, making sure those apprenticeship sites have their own pay scale set up, or something through supports in the community so it doesn't all end, which I love that he was being so proactive. And then, you know, we did part of which piggybacks into still wondering aspect too, is the pre-K for all. We talked about how to get centers to be willing to pay attention to these apprenticeships with all the other things going on in the community right now. We don't want the apprenticeships to go on the back burner. And then Sebastian pulled a 180 on me and he says, well, you know, one thing that he's doing is mentioning how apprenticeships are future proofing that. So in the future, this pre-K for all won't be, give them those snaps. I'm loving it. Good job, Sebastian. And then for the influence on our work, the pay and stipends, you know, all these examples that you provided were great for us to start thinking of that, to help those mentors, tapping into the refugee populations. Sebastian talked about Scale Up, how it made a huge difference, or he's part of Scale Up, and the pay and stipend made a huge difference for their program. Yeah, and I already talked about this, increasing skills for the mentors besides just the direct ways of them going through the time frame of being a mentor, giving them those upward mobility opportunities. And then the last thing for Still Wondering is how, we see the examples from Vermont and Rhode Island. How did they get where they're at? And I feel like we all mentioned how we're like 2 years behind where they're at. So what was the learning curves they went through to get where they're at?
That's interesting. Yeah, like what's their whole story and their narratives? What was that journey looking like? Huh. That's actually really, yeah. We'll circle back to that in some of the upcoming sessions. I like that idea. It's an evolution is what I would say. I always say apprenticeship, how it looks the first time around, your first cohort is very different than what it looks like in your third cohort, and extremely different from your, second year, third year, fourth year. So that's great. Thank you, Tad. I thought also, one of the things I just want to point out as you're talking about the ESL folks, is really like doing a deep dive. They talk a lot about the goodness of fit in the reading too. So making sure that the mentors, their background, their cultural background, their linguistics, all align with what the apprentice experience is, right? It allows for that relationship to deepen. It means that then your mentor is not only a help for you on the job, but also a help for you personally, and as you're finding community resources and navigating some of those challenges. So I always think that that's worth lifting up. Okay, so thank you, Carla, for volunteering. Hopefully you are also not a recorder as well. And I appreciate you sharing what your team talked about.
Yeah, so I am the reporter and the recorder, but that's okay. So my group that I was in was mostly design grants, and we are a scale up grant. So I was really curious to hear what their wonderings were from the position that they're in right now, because many of them are not actually, doing the work yet. So some of the things that was brought up was many of the things that have already been said, like how does pre-K for all affect it? How can the stipends, how can that be sustainable over time once this grant funding is gone? How do you keep that going? Like once you start it, you don't want to like take things away later. So that was a wondering. And we talked about, well, because a lot of them were design grants, they were still in the process of considering stipends and didn't have that in their plans yet. So they were wondering about that. And let me see if there's anything else. I don't think there was anything else that hasn't been said yet.
It's good to hear the common thread of the pre-K for all and the impact on this. So we'll be sure to circle back to that. And hopefully that conversation earlier today about, developing the new skill sets in lead teachers and advancing their pathway, as well as cultivating new emerging leaders and bringing them in, resonated with that conversation a little bit. All right, Karen, you're up.
Hello. So we talked similarly about stipends and making sure that the mentors have what they need in terms of support and CEUs. We spent a long time talking about working with education providers to provide the mentors, the training and assistance they would need. And our group has a lot of workforce development representation. So, not coming from the education perspective, those partners would be super helpful in that arena. We also, just really briefly at the end, I brought up the fact that mentor development is not as common of a theme or a focus area in other industries of apprenticeship, but how there is some inclusion of that in the proposed rulemaking that the United States Department of Labor is seeking comment on right now, and guidelines as to who could be a mentor for an apprentice. So that's something that we may be considering and thinking more about in relation to this in the future.
Great. Yeah. I think what Bank Street can offer is the idea of how critical that, teaching experience really is. And that's one of the assets of doing the apprenticeship, is that people have more time with children and more time in real life and with their mentor, rather than just having like a clinical experience or a student teaching experience. So that's a big aha moment to realize, what works in other industries might need to be a little bit more developed and ironed out when we're talking about early childhood education, because even if, it's early care and education, it's still a way of being with humans and not a way of being with tools or, instruments. And so learning that context and how to be with humans is a much more complex role and responsibility to have. So, okay, well, I am going to actually pass the mic because that barking isn't going to stop for a second. If you hear it in my background, we are going to kind of pivot a little bit and lean into the other reading for a minute.
Okay, yeah, thank you guys. It was such an interesting and it sounds like you guys had some really robust discussions. And I just wanted to briefly share just another just tiny snapshot from our experience in Hawaii where I was. So we had all of the issues that you all were talking about as well. So this is just this is a national thing. We had issues with even things dispersing the stipends in a timely manner. How are we ensuring that people get paid? Making these discussions culturally centered and culturally responsive. I think it was Chad was talking about making sure that the mentor, that you have English language speakers, but even beyond that, we were dealing with some people who had been affected by the Lahaina fires in Maui. So thinking about trauma informed and thinking about how we can support both the mentor and the apprenticeship in understanding that people's learning styles are really impacted when they go through hard stuff. I'm sure a lot of your folks have. So I just wanted to say that I've been in those shoes, and it's we have these global experiences. And I think that we're thinking a lot about intentionality in these relationships, in the mentor relationships. And I think the question is, how do you scale intentionality, and how do you make this a systems issue, what is really a relationship issue? So this is the second reading that we are doing now is Tara dropped it in the chat. Thank you so much, Tara. So we're going to give you all 5 minutes just to look at this reading. If you already read it, perfect. If you didn't, that's what this 5 minutes is for. And then we're going to share out about this. So this comes back from this big systems lens to really focus on what mentoring and coaching really looks like in an early childhood setting and what we're talking about when we're talking about these things. And so, so especially pages 5 to 8, if you want to read more, can. And then when we come back, we're just going to reflect on these questions. What stood out to you most? What challenged you most? And what are you still wondering about? And I am going to put on some music for you all. And if you don't like music while you're reading, then you can just mute us, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. So. And then I'm going to close, stop sharing my screen so that we can have a little bit of discussion about this. So as we come back together, the 3 questions are: what stood out to you the most? What challenged you the most? And what else are you still wondering about? All right. thoughts to start us out with? Yeah.
So I took the 5 minutes to go talk to our director because just today, an hour and a half ago, our lead teacher in one of the classrooms who has her master's in early childhood was in there in tears saying, I don't know how to deal with this anymore. So we got a couple kiddos that are on the spectrum and they just have some unique needs, some special needs, and we don't have the resources. So the word I just walked away with and telling her is we need coaching with content. And so we don't need another body in that room. So we have apprentices in each of the classrooms and she supports that, appreciates that, but we're trying to sort out if we're gonna do 4 days or 5 days a week next year under this GSRP funding, because we did a pilot, we did the 5th day. And she said, Dick, it'd be great if the teachers can just have that 5th day back because it'll minimize or reduce the amount of burnout because they need that day for just to process and figure out strategies. And I said, that's certainly one approach. And I don't dismiss that. Again, I'm not the teachers in these classrooms. And again, I heard and saw, and I mean, not saw, but heard an hour and a half ago, this teacher just in tears, but it's that coaching with content. And so that's what this differentiates this article is coaching versus mentoring. And I'm thinking to myself, well, Jen, as the director, that's part of your role as a center director is to coach staff and to be in these rooms with these teachers because you're that content expert. And that would be awesome if you could be that person, but then that assumes that she has a lot of background in special education to be able to offer that content to these teachers because they're struggling to deal with some of these kiddos. Mentoring is different. The mentors, that's that lead teacher in there day in and day out, work alongside their apprentices anyways. But they don't even have the skill set to figure out how to deal with these kiddos. So that coaching content expert is so critically important. So this article talked about, again, that's in our breakout, we talked about, those field supervisors when they're doing the practicums or whatever, they provide that content expertise. And I liked how this one group has somebody going, their coach is going once every 3 weeks for half a day. That would be powerful. But having content experts for certain areas, that coaching is so important. So anyways, maybe the center director, I walked away from this article thinking, I got to lean into Jen more here at the Early Learning Center to do that for us. That coaching part is different than mentoring. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah, I think it's like the really powerful blend of merging knowledge of the context with knowledge of the content is really like this, but I think what you're speaking to a little bit. Who else would like to share anything that came away from the meeting or the reading about what stood out to them, challenged them, what they're still wondering about? Yeah.
Can I go ahead? So I got to the section where it was talking about not all of the learning is related to like college credit. And that's exactly how our program runs. It is currently we're doing all of the professional development for the CDA and then the other classes outside of the CDA. And so our program is the 2-year program. So it's 288 training hours. And what Dick just said, like really, like it just hit me like, wow, we didn't realize this. Like we thought this was a really great plan when we made it. But our trainings that we have created on our own are all, it's like the same topics that you would get in the CDA, but we do a deep dive for the rest of the, year and a half outside of the CDA content. And so the topics that we're training on also allow for conversation to take place in those live trainings. And we can easily tailor that content to what it is our apprentices are experiencing in that time. So we can prompt a question about what are some of your experiences around this and quickly tailor that content to meet their needs in that moment, which Dick, thank you so much for saying that because I really like our program. I think our program's really amazing, but from what you said really made me think like, wow, we are really providing that content in time of need in a way that they need it. So thank you so much.
One of the things that I feel like speaking to what both of you are saying is that we're educator preparation programs fall short on is that if you've ever been in a preschool classroom before, you have to work right with someone else in your space, not the children, another co-teacher for 8 hours a day. And your communication skills and conflict resolution skills, really in mentor teacher, we really need to be intentional about supporting our mentor teachers and ensuring that like they have the communication skills that they need to solve problems when they arise. So, yeah. Would anyone else like to share? What else was on your minds? Oh, Carrie has a great comment in the chat. She said, if you're a relationship person, your natural tendency may actually increase burnout symptoms. Yeah. It's so true. And you can see this. I mean, we can understand it, right? If your heart is really going out for these teachers and the children and the families, especially if you're working in a high need population, then yeah, you absolutely will. And you need to develop the skills to have your own work-life balance and be able to, you know, have some barriers between yourself and your work.
Yeah, I threw a link in the chat just above that too. I just saw this morning. It's, if you've ever done the Clifton Strengths Finder, and it gives you like your dominant domains of, you know, what your strengths are, and like your go-to for like burnout and stress relief. Like you have a natural tendency based on what your strength is, and then there's suggested like burnout reduction. And for the people that were like their strength is relationship, their natural tendency is the only one in that whole document that it increases their burnout symptoms by 35%. Like everything else is actually a burnout reducer. And I saw that and I was like, oh, yep, I've lived that life before. Because your natural tendency is to give more and try to understand the perspective of the other person, and it ends up piling on. And so it's not a child care specific resource, but I was reading that report this morning, and yeah, it seemed relevant to what Dick was talking about. So
I love that connection. Thank you so much. That's really, really beautiful. I can't wait to look at that later. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Tara, and we're going to
Hey Liz, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I think Sebastian had something to say.
I'm so sorry. I didn't see
Thank
you.
you.
It's really quick. It's really quick. I just, the one thing that I also, one of the questions was like, what were you challenged by? And I think one thing that comes across with all of, when we talk about best practices and we're in our apprenticeship design and scale up phases, is thinking about the programs that likely need this the most.
Yeah.
And the diversity within those programs in terms of their ability to work with us to provide this training to mentors. So I'm thinking specifically about situations where, you know, we come into like I've worked with programs before that don't have an onboarding process kind of at all. And so those programs are in dire need of support with their workforce retention, because the people who are fulfilling those mentor roles are kind of like, oh, well, here's a new person, sort of tell them what to do. And that's kind of the support that they get. And so when I say it's kind of about a challenge, it's figuring out, you know, ideally we want to work toward fidelity across all of our apprenticeship sites as the intermediary, but we're starting from such different places with each program that's something that like I'm eager to learn more about, those like incremental steps we can take to building that, because some of the programs that need it the most really are in that position where it's they have more to get to that starting point that others are at already.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that there is like, I've been in centers before where the director sees an apprenticeship as like, oh, this is great. This is another body. Like, and the director has no training in mentoring or supervision or coaching. And then of course there'd be teachers don't have any in it. And then, so it's like, how do you develop systems to support these that can be so flexible, right? That's a great point. Okay. I'm going to now hand it over to Tara to talk about
developing systems. Actually, perfect transition. So I imagine that there's a lot swirling around in your head, and we have about 10 more minutes left, but I'm gonna try to finish with plenty of time to do the evaluation, because we really want your feedback, and the more you can fill in around sentences and information you give us, that would be great. Thank you. So we're going to put a link to a document called the Mentor Teacher Guide into the chat box for you. This link will bring you to a Google Doc that we're just going to kind of give a little overview on. This document I see as a living document, meaning it will continue to evolve. And this is for you and your partnership to kind of sketch out what you think your mentorship can look like. So there's different components into it that go into it. And then we have some guiding questions and things for you to think about. Our vision for this document is that this will give you a place to kind of track your decision making, gather information from your partners, and then pick apart the nuts and bolts. And that's where I hope our office hours will come in handy. So as you're looking this document over, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to look at it quietly. I just want to point out what's going on here. So you have a lot of the main elements that go into an EC mentorship. And then you have the ideas that are gathered with some guiding questions underneath it. The intent is not that you answer every single one of them. That's not the goal here. The goal is that those are there for you to be thinking about. They're considerations for you to make along the way. And then the last one is where you can just jot down your notes, any kind of progress made, any of your next action steps, whatever it might be. But we're also very open to your feedback on this document. So take a minute, look it over. Feel free to ask any questions. I do want to point out that at the back of the document, the very last page, as somebody who likes to keep all of my to-do things organized in one spot, there's a list, a place for you to list any of the supporting documents that you might need. So for example, if you're thinking about doing like an onboarding for your mentors, what kinds of things might you need? You might need a PowerPoint, right? That kind of gets used across employers or across cohorts. You might need, a list of the qualifications or a timeline for them. So that's kind of a place where you can gather the supporting documents that you'll want to be creating. All right, I welcome any questions or any thoughts on the document. Is your silence that you're still reading or overwhelmed by it? All right, so while you're looking at that, I just want to make it perfectly clear that this is a document for you. You can download it, you can amend it, you can kind of make changes to it. It's not something that we are going to say, hey, here's what you have to fill out. Although we will connect certain topic areas or elements to each session. And so our thought was that after today, hopefully you have some information around your goal of your mentorship, right? So thinking about what the overarching goal is, or at least the idea to bring that conversation back to all of your partners. Who are we looking to serve? What are we needing to design this for? What problem are we hoping to solve with a mentorship? And then also thinking about who your critical partners are, who's at the table, who can help problem solve some of the challenges we've talked through. We can kind of spend an hour each month in this community of practice, but the reality is a lot of the problem solving will have to come from the people who are, you know, front and center in this. So how are you thinking about the users or the apprentices that are out there and the employers and the kinds of things that they need in order to support the effort? So with that being said, I'm looking in the chat. There's no questions. Does anybody want to say anything about the document? Can I get a thumbs up if it's like a great document that you're thinking about? A middle one if you're like, this is so overwhelming, or like a, I don't need another thing in my life. Thumbs down. Great. Thank you. All right, perfect. So feel free to highlight any questions or things that you want to pick apart for our office hours. Normally what will be nice is we'll be meeting on a Thursday and then coming together again the next Tuesday. So it'll be a quick turnaround while things are still on your mind. But this time we have 2 weeks in between. So plenty of time to kind of get settled in, identify any questions. And if you need anything, feel free to communicate directly with us or through ECIC. But now I'm going to pass the mic back to Liz for our closing activity.
Yeah, so I know that we have given you all so much, like Pam and Bonnie just said, like this is a lot. We have a lot in this. And I think the mentor teacher guide gives us really something to like chew on. So in the chat, I would just like you all to think about and share one way, like one thing that you were going to do to support the design and implementation of your mentor program. Like think about maybe one step you're going to take, one action you're going to take. I like to like, it helps me when I'm in meetings to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do with this information. So you share that out as we close up today's time. Maybe create a guide, yeah. Oh, I love that, Dick, to share the article with the directors. Fantastic. Stipends. Yeah. I love that and this is just showing how everyone's approach is different. Like you all are coming at this from different angles. People want to have conversations. People want to go through the guide. People want to share the articles. And that really just shows like, this is your work that you're doing. These are your babies. And so hopefully that we can continue to support that over the course of our partnership together. And with that being said, I will hand it back over to ECIC.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you all for joining us today. Before you all leave, we do want to just ask if you could just take a couple minutes just to fill out the quick survey that we have regarding today's learning community. This will help best support us as we continue to plan for the upcoming office hours that are taking place on Tuesday, February 27th at 1 o'clock. Bank Street will be joining us there as well. So we look forward to having Tara and Liz again. And then we also have next month's learning community, which this will also help us support that, getting that feedback as well as we prepare for that. A couple other quick reminders. We have the continuation of progress meetings happening throughout the month, the office hours that I had already mentioned. And then just one quick reminder that just pertains to Steepletown and Southwest CCR is just that your 12-month spending reports are coming due at the end of this month. Other than that, yeah, we appreciate if you could just fill out that survey before heading out today. Otherwise, we thank you all and thank you, Tara and Liz, for joining us today. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to our team.
Steepletown and Southwest, that would be your 12-month narrative report rather than spending, just so you all know.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Misty.
Yeah, no worries.
There's just one quick thing I wanted to add. I forgot to say this. So your pre-work, if you found that helpful today to help accelerate your conversations, please let us know that. Also know that if we choose to do pre-work moving forward, we're going to use your feedback from today to help design following sessions. But we promise to get you that information as far in advance as possible. And so we would normally, if this was a well-oiled machine, we would be telling you right now, here's your homework for next time, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to be able to be responsive to your needs and your feedback. And so we'll keep you updated at least a week or two before. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Chad.
Bye, Chad.